My family demanded I co-sign a loan for my sister's new business. Now they blame me for its failure, and then Hey, I'm Alex, 33, and I found myself in a ridiculous mess thanks to what I thought was just helping out my sister. My family's always had a knack for complicating my life, but this time, well, they've really outdone themselves. So, here's the story of how I ended up on the hook for a failing business loan that my family thinks is all my fault. To set the stage a bit, my sister Emily is 28 F. She's one of those people with big dreams, creative, artsy, always cooking up some new idea. She's wanted to run her own business since forever, but she's always been a bit, well, impulsive. Our parents, especially my mom, Lori, 62, adore Emily's free spirit. To them, she's the shining light in our family, and I'm the stable one who's supposed to keep us all grounded. Then there's my dad, Tom, 64, a quiet guy who tends to agree with my mom on everything. Together, they make a pretty persuasive team when they want something. Unfortunately, this time, what they wanted was my signature on a loan I couldn't afford. It all started last summer when Emily came to me with this pitch. She wanted to open a high-end boutique in our hometown. She'd already picked the name, the design, and even had a list of expensive furniture and decorations she wanted to buy. She was practically glowing with excitement as she described it to me, saying she'd finally found her calling and just needed a little financial boost to get going. Alex, this is my dream. I know you think it's risky, but I can feel it. I'm meant to do this, she said, eyes wide, practically begging me to believe in her vision. I didn't want to rain on her parade, but the whole thing seemed off. Emily didn't have any business experience, and I was pretty sure she'd never managed anything bigger than a group project back in college. But she was so enthusiastic that it made me question myself. I figured maybe I was being overly cautious, as usual. Then, the conversation took a turn. So, there's just one little problem, she said, hesitating. It turned out she couldn't get approved for the business loan on her own. Emily's credit wasn't great, thanks to some credit card debt she'd racked up over the years, and she needed a co-signer with a solid credit history to back her up. Apparently, I was the only option in the family with a high enough credit score to make this work. I won't lie, I panicked a little. I'd worked hard to keep my finances in order, built up my credit, and saved diligently. I didn't want to throw all that away on a business I wasn't even sure would last. I tried to politely decline, saying I didn't feel comfortable co-signing such a large loan. But Emily was relentless, and soon, my parents jumped into the mix. It's family, Alex, my mom said during a Sunday dinner. You know how much this means to Emily. She's finally found her passion, and this is your chance to support her. It's just a co-signed, son, my dad added. You don't even have to pay anything unless things go wrong. And they won't. Emily's got a great idea. For days, my family kept chipping away at me. My mom called almost daily, reminding me of all the things Emily had done for me over the years. According to her, that meant the time Emily let me stay on her couch for 2 weeks when I was between apartments 4 years ago. Every single favor Emily had ever done for me suddenly became ammunition. I wanted to say no. Every part of my logical mind was screaming that this was a terrible idea, but I was torn. Emily was my sister, and we'd been close growing up. I remembered her coming to me for help with bullies when she was in school, and how she'd lean on me for advice when she was dating her first boyfriend. Now, here she was, asking me to believe in her. I could see how much it meant to her. So, I gave in. After a sleepless night thinking it over, I agreed to meet Emily at the bank to sign the paperwork. The loan officer walked us through the contract, explaining all the terms and risks, but the words blurred together. I signed, hoping with every fiber of my being that Emily would make it work. The loan was for $50,000, an amount that wouldn't completely ruin me if things went wrong, but would definitely mess up my life for a while. I tried to push down the unease bubbling up in my gut, telling myself this was the right thing to do. Emily's joy was instantaneous. She hugged me like I just handed her the keys to her future. You won't regret this, Alex. I promise, she said, already talking about her grand opening and the exclusive brand she planned to feature. My parents beamed with pride, like I'd just become some kind of hero. In the weeks that followed, Emily threw herself into her boutique with unbridled enthusiasm. She spent hours curating expensive decor, choosing fancy furniture, and stocking up on high-end inventory. Every time she posted about her progress on social media, our family group chat would blow up with praise and excitement. It was like she'd already made it big. But there were signs that all wasn't perfect. I visited the boutique a few times to see her setup, and it didn't take a finance degree to notice she was spending way more than necessary. The store looked more like a luxury showpiece than a practical business. When I gently asked if she'd done a budget, she waved me off, saying, "You worry too much, Alex. I know what I'm doing." I couldn't shake the feeling that things were headed for trouble. But every time I tried to offer advice or voice a concern, I was shot down, often by my own family. My mom would remind me to be supportive and let Emily handle her own venture. My dad told me that businesses often take a while to stabilize and that I shouldn't expect instant success. Emily's confidence blinded everyone. To her, this was the beginning of her empire, and she was sure it would only grow. I wanted to believe in her as much as she did, but every visit, every conversation left me feeling more anxious. The way she casually dismissed my concerns, the mounting expenses, it all pointed to one thing. She was in over her head. Still, I tried to brush off my doubts. Maybe I really was being too cautious. Maybe this was what all new business owners went through, and it would be fine once she got some steady customers. I told myself that she was my sister, that I'd done my part, and now I just had to trust her. But even as I left her shop one evening, with her thanking me profusely and promising I wouldn't regret it, I couldn't shake that sense of dread. I'd put my credit, my savings, and a chunk of my future on the line for Emily's dream. The boutique opened a month later, and at first, I have to admit, it looked like Emily was proving me wrong. The grand opening was a hit. She had a small crowd of locals lined up outside, and social media was buzzing with praise for her unique, luxury experience. She'd hired a professional photographer to capture the event, and every post made it look like she was running some high-end shop in New York, not a small town in Indiana. I wanted to believe that maybe I'd worried for nothing. My parents were beaming with pride, and Emily was acting like a minor celebrity, swamped with congratulations and compliments from friends, family, and even local news. I started thinking that maybe she'd pull it off after all. But then, a couple of weeks passed, and the initial excitement died down. I checked in with her to see how things were going, and she was still riding that wave of optimism. "The sales are a little slower than I thought, but it's just a matter of getting the word out," she assured me. When I asked about her finances, she just brushed it off, saying, "I've got it under control." But that's the thing, she didn't. The sales weren't coming in, and she was hemorrhaging money. I stopped by the shop a few times and noticed it was almost empty during the day. When I gently suggested offering a sale or adjusting her prices, she rolled her eyes and said, "Alex, I'm aiming for a specific market. This isn't supposed to be affordable for everyone." That's when I knew we had a problem. Our town wasn't exactly crawling with people who could afford $300 dresses or $100 candles. But Emily was convinced that her luxury boutique would attract the right clientele if she just waited long enough. It wasn't long before I started noticing other red flags. She hired a pricey interior designer to keep things fresh and kept investing in new inventory, piling up high-end brands and expensive decor that, frankly, just wasn't moving. At one point, I saw she'd bought a custom chandelier for the entryway, and I practically felt my stomach drop. I asked her how much it had cost, and she laughed it off, saying, "Don't worry. You have to spend money to make money, right?" I wanted to scream. All I could see was debt piling up and a sister who was refusing to see reality. The tension started to seep into our family gatherings, too. I'd ask simple questions, like how her sales were going, or if she considered bringing in more affordable options, and she'd snap at me. "Why are you always so negative, Alex? I don't need you hovering over me like this." I tried to back off, but I could feel that nagging sense of dread growing stronger. I confided in my mom, Lori, hoping she might talk to Emily or help rein her in a little. But my mom just waved me off, saying, "She's just getting started. Give her time. You always expect instant results, Alex." I couldn't believe it. My mom, who normally wouldn't spend a dime without budgeting for it, was suddenly so loose with advice when it came to Emily's business. I started to feel like I was the only one seeing the potential disaster looming. Then came the day I realized things were worse than I thought. I was at work when I got a call from one of Emily's suppliers. They'd apparently sent her multiple invoices that she hadn't paid, and they were starting to get impatient. The representative politely asked if I knew when she'd be paying, since my name was on the loan paperwork. I was floored. She hadn't mentioned a word about falling behind. When I confronted her about it, Emily got defensive. "Alex, it's just a temporary setback. They're fine with waiting a few more weeks," she said, crossing her arms and practically glaring at me. "That's not what they told me. They're calling me because my name is on the loan. Emily, this is serious. How far behind are you?" She wouldn't give me a straight answer, just muttered something about waiting on a big customer order to come through. But I could tell by her nervous tone that things were spiraling. I asked if she considered scaling back her inventory or cutting some of her more expensive pieces, but she shut me down. "I know what I'm doing, Alex. Just because you don't get it doesn't mean I don't have a plan." At that point, I realized I was hitting a wall. I couldn't get through to her, and every time I tried, it just pushed her further away. Our parents weren't helping either. Whenever I brought up my concerns with my mom and dad, they acted like I was attacking her. "She's just finding her footing," my dad said. "You have to be patient." I wanted to shake them and say, "Patient? She's dragging us all down with her." But I bit my tongue, afraid that one wrong word would make me look like the bad guy. Over the next few months, things only got worse. Emily threw a small anniversary event for her boutique, pouring even more money into promotions and exclusive limited editions. She'd gone all out again, setting up displays and even hiring a DJ to draw in a bigger crowd. But when I stopped by to see how it was going, the store was practically empty. Just a few of her friends and family, milling around with strained smiles, pretending they were impressed. She'd burned through almost half the loan at that point. Meanwhile, the bills kept piling up. I got another call from a different supplier about overdue payments, and I started to panic. I didn't know how to get through to her, and I was terrified she'd drive herself, and by extension, me, into bankruptcy. Family dinners became an absolute nightmare. My parents would go on about how proud they were of her and how hard she was working, and I'd sit there, biting my tongue, afraid that if I spoke up, it would just turn into another argument. I wanted to tell them that she was failing, that she was drowning in debt, and that I was the one who'd end up paying for it. But every time I tried to bring it up, they shut me down. "Alex, you've always been too critical," my mom would say. "Sometimes, you just have to let people make their own mistakes." I wanted to scream that her mistakes were literally my problem now. But I held back, unwilling to turn a family dinner into a shouting match. Then, one evening, I got a late-night call from Emily. She sounded panicked, more panicked than I'd ever heard her. She said she'd been looking over her finances and realized that she was in much deeper trouble than she'd thought. She confessed that her big customer order had fallen through and that she was behind on rent, supplier payments, and even utility bills. "Alex, I don't know what to do. I need help," she said, her voice breaking. Hearing the fear in her voice broke my heart a little, even if I was furious with her. I told her we'd talk about it the next day, trying to figure out what to do. But as I hung up, I knew this was just the beginning of a financial mess I'd only be dragged deeper into. And worse, I could feel it. My family would find a way to turn this into my problem, my responsibility to fix. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it was coming. The next day, I met Emily at a coffee shop to talk things over. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She had a folder full of paperwork, bank statements, overdue invoices, and rent notices that she slid across the table to me with trembling hands. "I don't know how this happened," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was doing everything right. I thought people would come." Looking over the mess in front of me, it became painfully clear that Emily's business was in free fall. The boutique had been bleeding money for months. The rent alone was more than she made in sales most months, and the invoices she'd been dodging were piling up. It was a train wreck, and I had no idea how she hadn't seen it coming. "Emily, why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though every part of me wanted to yell, to shake some sense into her. "You're so far behind. You needed to cut back months ago. You could have reduced your inventory or at least tried to bring in more affordable items. She just shook her head, looking defeated. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just held out a little longer, things would pick up. I didn't want to seem like a failure. My heart sank, but I also felt an anger rising inside me. She'd dug herself into this hole, but now she was dragging me into it with her. And I had a sinking feeling that I'd end up being the one held responsible, not just by the bank, but by our family. The worst part? I was right. A few days after our conversation, I got a call from the bank. They politely informed me that Emily had officially defaulted on the loan. As her co-signer, I was now liable for the full $50,000, plus interest. I felt the blood drain from my face as the reality of it hit me. This wasn't just a family dispute or a personal favor anymore. This was my financial future on the line. When I confronted Emily, she broke down, crying and apologizing, but I could barely listen. I was too numb, too angry. I'd worked so hard to build a stable life, to save for my future, and in one stroke, she'd put me thousands of dollars in debt. Then, my parents got involved. Of course, they had their own version of events. We sat down for a family discussion, which, in reality, was just an ambush. My mom opened by saying how heartbroken she was over how things had turned out for Emily, acting like I was a stranger, not her son. They all sat across from me, serious expressions etched on their faces, as if this was an intervention and I was the problem. "Alex," my mom started, putting on her best concerned mother face, "I know this is a difficult situation, but we all need to step up and help Emily through this. It's what families do." I could barely believe my ears. Step up and help? I'd already done that by co-signing the loan in the first place. I told them as much, but they brushed it off like it was nothing. "You didn't do enough to help her manage the business," my dad added, crossing his arms. "You have experience with finances. You could have checked in more often, made sure she was on track. She was just following her dream, and you're the one who understands this stuff." That was it. My parents actually expected me to take the fall for Emily's business collapsing, and they were trying to guilt me into believing it was my fault. They kept bringing up family loyalty, how Emily was counting on me, and how I'd let her down. "Mom, Dad, I co-signed the loan. I took a huge risk for her, and now I'm the one who's on the hook. I have my own life, my own bills. I can't just drop everything to clean up her mess." But they wouldn't hear it. To them, this was a betrayal, a violation of some unspoken family code where I was expected to sacrifice my future for Emily's mistakes. "Money isn't everything, Alex," my mom said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "You're too focused on yourself and not on what your sister is going through. You think we're not all hurting? She's your sister. She needs you." I was speechless. My parents didn't seem to grasp the severity of the situation or the impact it would have on my life. They were treating it like a minor inconvenience, something that could be solved if I just stepped up a little more. Emily sat there, silent, looking pitiful. When I glanced at her, she wouldn't meet my gaze. She didn't even try to defend me. It was as if she'd already accepted that I was the scapegoat, the one who would absorb all the fallout. Feeling trapped, I tried one last time to appeal to reason. "Look, I'm sorry Emily's business didn't work out, but I have to think about my own financial stability. I can't afford to pay off this loan and keep going as if nothing happened." My mom's eyes hardened. "If you won't help, then I don't know what kind of brother you are, Alex. We thought you cared about family." That line hit hard. They were practically disowning me over this, making it sound like I was abandoning them. But they had no idea what they were asking. They wanted me to shoulder the burden of Emily's choices, all while acting like I'd done nothing to help her. A few days later, I started getting calls from debt collectors. My credit score, which I'd spent years building, was taking a hit, and every missed payment added more interest, piling the debt higher and higher. I was furious, helpless, and completely abandoned by the very family I tried so hard to help. I spent hours poring over my finances, trying to figure out how I could make it work without draining my entire savings. Every dollar I had saved for emergencies, for my own future, now felt like it was being siphoned away to cover someone else's failure. One night, after another call from a collector, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Emily, hoping maybe she'd found a way to pitch in, to at least take partial responsibility. But when I brought it up, she got defensive. Alex, it's not like I meant for this to happen. I tried my best. Okay? It's not my fault people didn't show up. Besides, you agreed to co-sign. So technically, it's partly your responsibility too. Her words left me stunned. I was partly responsible? The entire loan was in my name now, and she had the nerve to act like this was somehow mutual? Emily, I co-signed because you begged me, because Mom and Dad guilt me into it. You promised you'd handle everything. You said you had a plan. Plans change, Alex, she snapped. You can't blame me for the economy or for people not coming to the shop. I hung up, feeling more isolated than ever. My family was nowhere to be found when I needed them, and I was starting to realize that they'd never truly cared about my sacrifices. To them, it was just about what I could do for Emily. In the following days, the tension with my family only grew. My parents still acted coldly toward me, and Emily seemed to avoid me altogether. My frustration turned into anger, but there was nowhere to direct it. I was trapped, financially tied to a sinking ship, with no way to cut myself loose. And the worst part? My family still didn't seem to understand why I was upset. Every time we spoke, they'd act like I was the one who'd done something wrong. I could see it in their eyes, the disappointment, the quiet judgment, the way they'd sigh and shake their heads, as if I'd failed them. The debt wasn't just a number on a piece of paper. It was a shadow over my life, threatening to unravel everything I'd worked for. And with every passing day, I felt more like a stranger in my own family. I was on my own. I was at my breaking point. The debt was looming over me like a dark cloud, suffocating every aspect of my life, and no one in my family seemed to care. My savings were dwindling, my credit was in ruins, and yet my family acted like I was being unreasonable for wanting to protect myself. Every conversation left me feeling like I was the villain for wanting a way out of this mess. Then came the real betrayal, the thing that shattered any remaining loyalty I had toward my family. One evening, I got a call from an old family friend, a guy named Mark who'd known my parents since before I was born. He's not the type to gossip, but he sounded worried and awkward, like he didn't quite know how to break something to me. I had a feeling it was about the boutique situation. After all, my family had been pretty open with everyone else about their disappointment in me. Alex, I don't want to meddle, but did you know your parents actually encouraged Emily to take out that loan? I went silent, the blood draining from my face. What do you mean? Well, Lori and Tom, your mom and dad, they were talking about how they'd been telling Emily that you'd always have her back, you know? They told her you'd co-sign for her if she needed it. I thought you knew. I didn't even know how to respond. My parents had been encouraging Emily to take this financial leap, all the while assuring her that I'd be there as her safety net. They knew she wasn't ready. They knew she didn't have the financial stability for it, but they encouraged her anyway, promising my support without even consulting me. I felt sick. Everything about the last few months suddenly made sense. The way they'd pushed me into co-signing, how they'd pressured me to be there for her, and why they'd been so quick to pin the blame on me. I wasn't just their son to them. I was their backup plan, their financial safety valve. I was nothing more than a tool they could use to prop up Emily's dreams. Consequences be damned. I called my mom, praying that Mark was wrong, that there was some other explanation. But when I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. In fact, she acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, Alex, you're blowing this out of proportion," she said with a dismissive laugh. Emily needed to believe in herself. We knew you'd be there to support her. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. The big deal is that you put my entire financial future on the line without even asking me. You told Emily I'd back her up without once thinking about what that would do to me. Mom sighed, as if I were being a petulant child. Alex, she's your sister. Families make sacrifices for each other. You're being dramatic. Besides, you're financially stable. You can handle it. Financially stable? Not anymore. My credit is wrecked, Mom. I'm barely scraping by, and I'm drowning in debt because of your sacrifice for family nonsense. Do you even care about what this is doing to me? There was a long silence on the other end, then a resigned sigh. Alex, I don't know what you want me to say. You're her big brother. You have a responsibility to help her. I don't understand why this is such a problem for you. Her words stung, not just because of what she was saying, but because of what it meant. My family didn't see me as a person with my own struggles and goals. To them, I was just the safety net, the one who'd always be there to clean up their messes and support their dreams. And the fact that I'd sacrificed so much already, it meant nothing. After that call, I made a decision. I was done bending over backward for people who couldn't care less about my well-being. I needed to protect myself, even if it meant going against my family. But first, I had to figure out how to dig myself out of this financial hole they'd thrown me into. The next morning, I set up a meeting with a financial advisor. She listened patiently as I explained the entire situation, from the loan I'd co-signed to the family pressure to the escalating debt. She didn't judge or lecture me, but as I went through the details, I could see the concern in her eyes. Well, Alex, we can work out a repayment plan, but it's going to be tight, she said, pulling out a calculator and crunching numbers. We'll need to restructure your budget and maybe look into some debt relief options. It'll take time, but if you're disciplined, we can get you back on track. It wasn't a quick fix, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I could handle this, I realized. I'd have to make sacrifices, cut out a lot of things I'd been saving for, but I could dig myself out of this debt without relying on my family. Of course, the moment I told my parents about my decision to handle things on my own, they were furious. They wanted me to take out a second loan to help Emily rebuild, insisting that this was just a minor setback and that we could work together to make it right. It was like they hadn't heard a single word I'd said about my own financial crisis. No, I said firmly, feeling a strength I hadn't known I had. I'm not taking out another loan, and I'm not paying for Emily's mistakes anymore. I'll handle the debt, but I'm not putting myself deeper into this mess. You're abandoning her, my mom said, her voice cold. After everything she's been through, you're just walking away? She's been through? I nearly laughed. Mom, she put herself in this situation, and you both encouraged her. You made promises for me without ever asking me. I've been paying for those promises ever since, and I'm done. The conversation ended with my mom in tears and my dad silent, looking at me like I was a stranger. Emily didn't even speak to me. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock, like she couldn't believe I was finally saying no. And that was that. I left their house feeling more alone than ever, but also strangely liberated. For the first time, I'd set a boundary, and despite the guilt they tried to heap on me, I wasn't backing down. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work, trying to rebuild my finances and claw my way out of debt. I stopped attending family dinners, ignoring the texts and calls from my parents that alternated between guilt-tripping and outright begging. They kept insisting that I was tearing the family apart, but I'd finally accepted the truth. My family had no problem tearing me apart as long as it served their needs. One night, a few weeks later, Emily showed up at my door, looking defeated. She asked if she could come in, and despite everything, I let her. Part of me still wanted to help her, to fix things, but I knew I had to stay strong. Alex, I'm sorry, she said, barely looking at me. I know I messed up. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I know you didn't, Em, but you have to understand, this isn't just about the money. It's about the way our family just assumed I'd be there to clean up the mess. She nodded, but I could see she didn't fully understand. So, is there any way we can fix this? I shook my head. I'll pay off the debt, but I can't be your safety net anymore. I need to take care of my own life now. You have to figure out your own way forward, without expecting me to save you. She left, looking lost, and I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I loved my family, but I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for them. I needed to start putting myself first, no matter how much they hated me for it. In the days that followed, I began setting new boundaries. I stopped answering their calls, stopped explaining myself. I focused on rebuilding my life, knowing that this time, I wasn't going to let anyone drag me down. And for the first time in years, I felt free. In the weeks that followed my last conversation with Emily, my life felt quieter, almost strangely so. Without the constant barrage of calls from my parents or guilt-inducing messages in the family group chat, I had more time to think, to breathe, and to figure out what my life might look like without constantly worrying about everyone else's dreams. I'd made my choice. I was going to prioritize myself for the first time in, well, maybe ever. It wasn't easy. The debt was still there, hanging over me like a shadow. Every month, I'd watch a chunk of my paycheck go toward chipping away at what was left of that disastrous loan. But I could handle it. My financial advisor helped me create a strict budget, and while I had to give up a few luxuries here and there, I could see a way out. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking back control, slowly but surely. Of course, my family wasn't giving up that easily. At first, my mom tried the same old tricks, calling, texting, occasionally showing up at my door. She'd bring up memories from childhood, stories meant to tug at my heartstrings, reminding me of what it meant to be part of a family. It hurt, honestly. Part of me still wanted to let her in, to go back to the way things were, but I reminded myself of the reality. I'd been nothing more than a backup plan to them, a convenient fix for Emily's dreams. I couldn't go back to that, no matter how much they tried to reel me in. Then, one day, the messages stopped. It was like they'd finally given up, and I didn't know whether to feel relieved or sad. I hadn't realized how much I still craved their approval, even after everything that had happened. But I couldn't let myself get pulled back in, and it seemed they'd come to terms with that too. Emily, surprisingly, was the one who reached out after that silence. She sent me a text, short and to the point. Asterisk, can we talk? Asterisk. I thought about ignoring it, but something inside me told me I needed this. Maybe I needed closure, or maybe I just wanted to hear her side one last time. So, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my place. She looked different. Her usual bubbly energy was muted, her eyes tired and serious. For the first time, she seemed to carry a weight I recognized all too well. Alex, she started, her voice tentative, I owe you a real apology. For everything. I think I finally understand what you were trying to say. I was selfish, and I relied on you way more than I should have. Her words surprised me, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. When the boutique failed, I was devastated. I thought I was doing something great, something that would make our family proud. And I thought that as long as you were there, it would work out, no matter what. It sounds so ridiculous now, but Mom and Dad always made me feel like you'd be there to fix it if anything went wrong. I guess. I just never thought about what that would cost you. It was like a weight lifted off my chest hearing her acknowledge it. I could see genuine regret in her eyes, and for the first time, I felt like she was seeing me as more than just her older brother, more than just the family's safety net. I appreciate that, Emily, I said carefully, but you have to understand that I can't keep sacrificing my future like that. I need to be able to take care of myself, to build my own life without always worrying about being dragged into someone else's problems. You need to stand on your own too. She nodded, and for the first time, she looked almost relieved. I get it. I think I finally understand. I've been talking to a career counselor and looking into jobs. I need to start over, and I know it's going to be hard, but I'm ready. I can't keep living like this, dependent on everyone else. It's scary, but I have to learn to make it on my own. Hearing that gave me a strange sense of closure. It didn't erase the debt, it didn't make everything better, but it felt like a turning point. For both of us. Maybe Emily was finally starting to see the world through a clearer lens, and maybe I was too. We said our goodbyes, and this time, I didn't feel the bitterness that had been gnawing at me for so long. Instead, I felt something closer to acceptance. As the months passed, I continued to work toward paying off the loan. I picked up a few side projects to accelerate my progress, keeping my head down and focusing on rebuilding my own stability. I wasn't in regular contact with my parents anymore. Occasionally, I'd get a text from my dad, short and awkward, and I could tell he wanted to reach out, but there was still this unspoken wall between us. Maybe one day, things would change, but I wasn't counting on it. I'd learned not to pin my hopes on anyone but myself. One evening, while going over my finances, I realized that I'd crossed a milestone. I was halfway through the debt. It wasn't exactly a moment for fireworks, but but it felt like I was finally emerging from under a cloud that had followed me for far too long. Looking back, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Regret for not setting boundaries sooner. Sadness for the family ties that felt frayed and maybe permanently damaged. But also pride. I'd stood up for myself, something I wasn't sure I could do. I'd drawn a line and refused to cross it, even when it meant losing some of the people closest to me. And as hard as that was, it was worth it. The debt didn't feel like a burden anymore. It was just a number, something I could conquer in time. What mattered more was the realization that I didn't need my family's approval to feel complete, to feel whole. I'd spent years living under this invisible weight, trying to live up to their expectations, trying to be the good son who held everything together. But now, I understood that I had the right to live my own life, to make choices that served my happiness and not just theirs. As I neared the end of that year, I celebrated quietly, by myself, reflecting on how far I'd come. I didn't have a huge social circle, but I had a few close friends who'd supported me along the way, friends who'd reminded me what it felt like to be valued for who I was, not for what I could do for someone else. And I was grateful for that. Emily and I talked from time to time, exchanging updates on our lives. She'd taken a job in a small marketing firm, working her way up from the bottom, and while it wasn't as glamorous as her boutique dream, she seemed more grounded, more realistic. She was making her own way, and I could see she was proud of that, even if it had been a painful journey to get there. My parents and I? Well, we were polite. Civil, I suppose. I could tell they still didn't fully understand my choice, still felt betrayed in some way. But I'd come to accept that I couldn't change their minds. I wasn't responsible for their happiness, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back into that cycle. In the end, choosing myself wasn't just about walking away from the debt or setting boundaries with my family. It was about learning to respect myself enough to demand the same respect from others. It was about letting go of the need to please everyone, to be everything for everyone. I don't know what the future holds for me and my family. Maybe things will improve one day. Maybe they won't. But for now, I'm at peace. And for the first time, I'm ready to move forward, with no strings holding me back.